This evening.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm glad you're here with us tonight. I'm Gail Santy from the Central Kansas Library System, and I have some of my colleagues here tonight. Will you please introduce yourself?
Good evening. I'm Patty Collins, and I'm the Youth Services and General Consultant here at CKLS.
Oh, you're muted.
Good evening, I'm Liz Jiglow and I am the CKLS cataloger.
I'm Michael Adamic and I'm the Digital Resources Manager at CKLS.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us tonight. It takes a village truly to make these. One person to record, one person to supervise, one person to keep us on track, even though we've got a PowerPoint. If you're a brand new trustee, I want to encourage you to watch the recording of last night. It was Library Board Basics. That'll be up on our Central Kansas Library System YouTube channel tomorrow. I'm sorry, next week. And it will really give you a good grounding in the basics. A trustee can serve 4 years on a public library board. And I've heard it said many times that just when it's time for them to go off the board, they finally felt like they knew what they were doing. That's one of the reasons we do these trustee training sessions for you. And thank you for tonight, joining us tonight. Tonight is what we call a trustee topic, and tonight's topic is a library board evaluation. One of the important jobs of the library board is to hire, possibly fire, and evaluate the library director. Your library director, you may call them a librarian, but we'll use director here or librarian interchangeably. They need to have an evaluation every year. An evaluation is a semi-formal process that you go through as a board. It can be 2 or 3 individuals, or it can be the whole board working together. And it's a way for you to assess the librarian's work, what they're doing, what they're doing in the community, how they're working with the board, and things like that. I always say that you should never hear anything new in an evaluation. You should always maintain those open communication channels throughout the year with the library director. Now, tonight we're going to talk about how a library board can evaluate themselves or itself. And one of the things, again, is that when you're doing this evaluation, you really shouldn't learn that much new unless it's your first time going through. And if it's your first time going through, it's really going to give you a great roadmap to improve yourself as a trustee, which is the same thing as a board member, or as a board as a whole. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to share my screen here. And I am going to, I don't want my inbox. I guess this is it. Let's go ahead here, and I'll just close this inbox because I don't need to see that hot mess. And I need to make that smaller and open up the slideshow. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. So tonight you're here. We're going to talk about library board evaluations. And again, I'm Gail Santy. There's my email there. If you have any questions that you would like answered in private, you may certainly email me or my colleague, Patty Collins. If you have any questions as we're going through the presentation, please feel very comfortable either typing your question in the chat or unmuting your mic and speaking. If you have an anonymous question you would like to have answered while we're on tonight, you can privately chat Patty Collins. You can send her a message through the chat, and she will read that question aloud for me. Okay, here we go. So how do we know when it's time to evaluate the library board? There are lots of things on this slide, but the real big sign is that Nothing new is happening at the library. People don't show up to board meetings. The board takes the whole summer off. And people don't understand what their responsibility is as a board. Those are the big ones. They're not engaged, or they're showing up and they've done no preparation for the meeting. They're just putting in their time. A library colleague at the state library who is now retired said that when you've got a bunch of apathetic board members, they're probably just on the board to strengthen their obituary. And we don't want our boards to be like that at CKLS. We want our boards to be really dynamic. We want our board members to realize that they are the most important volunteers in their town. We'll get to that reason in just a little bit. We want them to be excited about coming to board meetings, and we want them to be able to really do a good job in what they were appointed and approved by council to do. The board could work more effectively or efficiently. Sometimes it can indeed take a long time to come to a decision. But one of the things that I always say, if it's something important, it should take the board 3 meetings to make a decision. The first meeting, they get the information. The second meeting, they hold discussion. In the third meeting, there may be more discussion and then ultimately a vote. Now, that's for a big decision. Sometimes you have to make a snap decision. And a lot of the decisions the board makes aren't really big decisions. One of the other important things that we know that when it's time to evaluate the board is when the board does not act as a corporate body. A corporate body is an important phrase to know. Library boards as a whole cannot, the board as a whole can be sued, and that's why your library has insurance. But as individuals, you cannot be sued if you act as a corporate body. So a good example of that is that there's one board member who outside of meeting comes and tells the librarian what they need to be doing. And it's not the stuff that was discussed in the meeting. That board member has taken it upon themselves to be the boss of the librarian. And so they don't understand the concept of corporate body. No one individual is the boss of the librarian. It is the whole board acting together. And that's what makes a corporate body. In Sterling, Kansas right now, they're going through some messy PR about a situation where the library director and her assistant were terminated. And they say that they were terminated because the board didn't want to have an autism infinity, rainbow infinity sign up in a display. Now, that's not the point of what I'm going to talk about, but individual board members have given interviews. And one of them forgot to say that I'm just speaking for myself as an individual. I'm not speaking for the whole board. And so that was a blunder. But it is, a person is nervous when they're talking to the press and there's a situation going on like that. When board members expect special privileges, it might be another time to evaluate the board. And by special privileges, I mean that they believe they're first to get the new bestseller. They have a key to the library, and they come in after hours to use the copier or to use a computer or to get books for themselves without checking in and out. Key control is something that we need to talk about more often. Really, the only people who should have keys to the library are the city, if the city owns the building, the library director, and perhaps the board chair and any employees there are. Other board members don't need to have keys, and they don't need to get into the library outside of library hours. Another reason could be that when the board does the annual evaluation of the library director, they just don't feel like it's an effective process. They feel like they struggle with that, or that they always write the same things. The library board is, the director's doing a fine job. We're really happy. And they might not have a vision for the future of the library. And an evaluation does not have to be a negative thing for a library director, by the way. Okay. So if we understand what the board's relationship with the director is, that helps the board better understand how they're performing. Trustees or library board members and directors both have different roles. Trustees' primary roles are governing the library, hiring the director, approving policy, and making sure that the library is funded. The director's job is to hire any additional staff, to make sure that the policies are implemented, and to run the library on the day-to-day. The board needs to develop a trust relationship with the director, and sometimes that takes a little bit of work, and that's where CKLS can definitely come in and help. But the director is the CEO of the library, and the board needs to be able to trust the CEO. While the board meetings are for the board to govern the library director should be involved in those board meetings, because the library director knows what's going on in the library on the day-to-day. The board should be having the director submit a written director's report, and the director should be giving a verbal report, just a brief verbal report, and any statistics and numbers and stories that the board needs, and be able to answer questions for the board. The director's role in the board meeting is to serve as the technical advisor to the board. To strengthen that relationship, the board has a formal process, and formal process means it's on your board calendar every year, to evaluate the library director. CKLS has all kinds of forms to help you with that. And here's a tricky one, is that the staff and the trustees or the board members have a special relationship. Remember, I said that the board hires the director and the director hires the other staff. That means that if staff have a request or a concern, they first go to the director. If the board has a concern about a staff member, they also go to the director. The director is the conduit between the staff and the board. The staff would go directly to the board if they have addressed problems or concerns with the director, and they feel that they have not received satisfaction in an answer. The board's first question, if staff approaches them, is, have you spoken to the director about this? What do your board meetings look like? Do people show up on time? If they're not going to be able to make it, one of the best things they can do is say, hey, I'm going to be traveling, but I can join by phone. And that way we have a quorum if we need to make a vote to do business. That's easy to do. And it is an absolutely valid way to attend a meeting. Many times you'll have board or people who would like to be on the board, but they travel during the winter. They go someplace warm. Or when it's summer, they leave and they go someplace cool. In small towns, that's still a way to have someone be on the board, even if they are a traveler, is to have them phone into the meeting. So to have an effective meeting, the board needs good information. The director is the person who puts the packet together. The agenda is frequently prepared by the director, but the best agendas are prepared by the board chair working with the director. The board chair will have a very special relationship with the director. They'll work with them a little more one-on-one than any of the other board members. The treasurer may also work with the director more in a one-on-one. So the director is preparing the packet. We want good statistics, how many visits, number of items checked out, number of programs, program attendance. Did the director attend any meetings on the behalf of the library in city? Did they get any comments, positive or negative, from the community that they feel that it's important for the board to know about? A board can only make as good a decision as the information they receive. Last night, we talked about a consent agenda. And in a consent agenda, the board receives the packet 1 week before the meeting, not the night of the meeting when they show up, not the day before, but 1 week before the meeting. This gives the board members plenty of time to read the packet in advance, to write notes, and to prepare any questions they may have.
When I unplugged it over there,
When you're recruiting board members, don't tell them they just need to show up for a meeting 1 hour a month, because that's just not so. They need to spend about an hour outside of the meeting reading the packet and preparing for the meeting. Then when the meeting starts, there is a clear agenda, but it's a consent agenda. And what a consent agenda does is it lets the board very quickly advance through the old information, the minutes, the financials, and move forward to the new business and future planning. For a meeting to be effective, the board members need to regularly attend. One way to make sure that that happens is about this time every year is to get together with your board and see, is this a good day of the month, and is this a good time for the board to meet? There is nothing that says that for the next 40 years in the future, your board meeting has to be the second Monday of every month at 7 o'clock. Sometimes you're going to miss out on great board members if you think that you've got that meeting date and time carved in stone. You also want to use Robert's Rules of Order for small boards. That allows for a much more informal board meeting. And if you'd like to get a copy of that, CKLS has a handy cheat sheet we can print out for all of your board members. How is the board doing with making decisions? Remember, I said that the board takes time to make decisions, sometimes as long as 3 months or even longer. If the board is reviewing policy, and that needs to be done every year, the easiest way to do it is to look at 1/3 of your policies every year. But if the board is reviewing policy, it needs to be 3 months. The first month, they're going to read it through. The second month, they're going to discuss it, and they're going to ask the library director for input and any input from additional staff members, and the board director can gather that up for you. And then in the third month, you'll be able to approve and update that policy. Sometimes you don't have time to make a decision. The roof is blown off. You need to make a decision. We understand that, but on most instances, when you have that luxury, take your time to make decisions. Always vote your conscience. Don't go along with the group if it's not something that you can believe in or agree with. Now, if you're the only one that feels that way and the board votes the opposite of what you voted, what you need to understand is we'll go back to corporate body again. Because once you leave the meeting, you need to support the decision of the board in your actions and in your words. That's what corporate body is as well. In order to make good decisions, the board members need to review the packet before the meeting. Where am I? There we go. Financials. Every month, the board receives full and accurate information. You need to receive the information you need because you are ultimately responsible for the finances of the library. When you look over the list of things that were purchased, if there's something there that you don't understand, you speak up and you say, I don't understand, Madam Library Director, would you please explain that to me? A good director will point out things that the boards start getting used to seeing. They should point out that there's an automatic withdrawal every year every month for utilities and internet, and that once a year we pay for garbage removal. And then they should point out any odd things in there. What's this one thing that doesn't look like all the others? The library director or the treasurer, when they're reading over the financials, is a great opportunity to help educate the board on the finances of the library. And the reason for this is that when that treasurer goes off the board, someone else has to take that position. Treasurer is the hardest position to fill. I think that's sometimes because there's a little information hoarding, but there's a lot of really not understanding how the finances work. How do you give a raised hand?
I do.
You have to
in
pop
many-
in because I can't see your hand raised. So go ahead and just pop
Okay.
in anytime. Go ahead.
In many of our libraries, they have hired a bookkeeper.
Yes.
So what is the role of the bookkeeper and the treasurer in those situations?
Well, I would say that that's an excellent thing, and I highly recommend it because then it makes it a lot easier to get a treasurer position. And in small towns, that means the library has a very small budget and very few transactions each month. Sometimes those bookkeepers will work for a very nominal fee, and they will keep the books of the library. The library director will make sure that all bills and transactions get to that bookkeeper in advance of the board meeting so that they can make the packet. And then the treasurer's report will be prepared by the bookkeeper with all of those transactions. Then at the board meeting, remember, they get their packet a week before. The treasurer will take some extra time and go over that treasurer's report and ask the bookkeeper and the library director any questions they may have. At the actual meeting, it's the treasurer then who gives the report and is able to answer questions. And I'll tell you right now, there's going to be something you're going to miss, and it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'll find out and I'll let you know next month. That's just how it is. No one person can know everything.
So another question about finances is kind of like key control. We found the case where some of our libraries, everybody on the board wants to sign or be a signer on the bank accounts.
Sure. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with that, except the treasurer cannot sign checks. The treasurer can have access to the bank account, but the treasurer cannot sign checks. Also, the library director does not sign checks. The library director can have access to the bank account, especially where there's so much online banking now, but they don't sign checks. Two people are supposed to sign the checks. Most always, that is the president and the secretary. The treasurer, if they're doing their job, they don't have time to sign checks. They have far more important things to do than to sign checks. They have to make sure the finances of the library are all in order, and they need to be able to explain that to other people. I'm not making this up, and it's not CKLS law, it's actually Kansas statute. Remember, I said that I think that library board members are the most important volunteers in your community, and that's because Kansas statutes exist on how the library board should function. And the treasurer not signing checks is one of those statutes. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. The board has plenty of time to discuss budget issues and ask questions and have things answered. And the board understands the impact of their decisions on library services. One of the questions we got last night was, what about a board that is going to reduce everyone's pay, maybe take away benefits that they always had, and take away vacation time? And while it's certainly within a board's purview to do that, they need to understand the impact that those decisions are going to have on library services. And those are going to be very, very detrimental. There are better ways to realign your finances to make up for shortages. And that board needs to first, right off the bat, contact CKLS, and we can come work with you very closely with that. Yeah, that would be a decision that would be really bad if it needed to be made at all. And remember, the board is in charge of funding, and so the board needs to be prepared and motivated to talk to the city officials. They may be commissioners or council members, whatever it is in your town, to promote the budget. That shouldn't just happen in June. That should happen regularly, and it can be informal. Go ahead, Patty.
So give some examples. If in the case of the benefits not being the best option to borrow money from or take money from, what other areas might you more likely recommend?
Okay, it's very individualized, and it really depends on the local community, the budgetary issue, and we'll do some future forward planning as well to determine how long this situation may last. But a library is not just books. Libraries are about information. Books are just one way that people get information. But in and of themselves, they do nothing. They sit on the shelf. They just sit there. Many people don't know how to find the books. Many people don't even come into the library to look at the books. One of the first things I would take a good look at is your collection budget and see what you've got allocated there, how much to each different type of item, like audiobooks or movies or paperbacks or hardbacks, children's or adults. I would then also look at hours, but that would be my last choice, is to look at hours. The book budget is always one of the first ones. I would also look at the programming budget. If the library staff is buying all new supplies every semester for crafts for story time, there's a better way to do it that way. Those crafts can be a lot cheaper, and those supplies can spread a lot further. Those are two examples off the top of my head.
So this gives me an opportunity to put in a plug for some of the things that CKLS can do for you. Your programming problems don't have to be a problem.
No.
All you have to do is have your library director contact me or Diane Bott here in the CKLS Youth Services area, and we have a large collection of materials that you may borrow for your library programs that don't cost anything, and these are items only available to CKLS member libraries. And then we also have a couple of special services that make creation of story time or programming materials cheaper. Like we have a die press where we punch out letters for your bulletin boards or materials for story time. We also have bulletin board materials to make displays much less time intensive and quicker to put together. So when finances are in question, the call is to CKLS, because there's ways we can help you stretch your dollar that you might not have any idea about.
Now, Patty, and this is me being silly, of course, I know that Diane, you and Diane work in the youth services department. Are those programming materials just for kids?
Oh, that is no longer the case. Actually, we got a brand new game. It's called the Think Game for adults, and it has some.
It looks so fun.
It is. It asks. One of the questions is, name something that you wouldn't tell your in-laws, or those kinds of things. But we have. I mean, everybody plays with Legos. It doesn't matter how old you are, and an adult Lego program is completely appropriate. But we do have board games as well as other materials that are appropriate for teens, adults, and then we also have materials that are appropriate for the senior set as well. And so don't think automatically because they're coming out of youth services that it's just an item for a 6-year-old, because it's not. We do everything from 1 to 100.
Thank you, Patty. By the CKLS system plan, library staff are required to partake in 6 continuing education programs a year. Library board members need to participate in a trustee training every year. There's more available to trustees. Every new board member who comes on, and usually they come on in June, unless they're going to fill a partial term, they should receive an orientation on their roles and responsibilities. They should get some sort of notebook or folder. It's got at least the last 3 months of board packets and financials. It has the bylaws and copies of any policies. And if your library has a strategic plan, there should be a copy of that in it. If the library has a mission and a vision statement, it should be there as well. They don't just get handed the information. There's a little give and take. Sometimes the board chair does the orientation, but the library director should be involved as well. And the library director should give the board member a tour. Now you may think this board member is a really great library patron. They come in all the time. Well, they need to have a tour as if they were a visitor for the first time, because there are going to be some things that they're going to learn there about the library that they didn't know. A patron wouldn't notice that in about 5 years, we're going to have to replace the roof. That's something a board member needs to know. CKLS every year offers at least 2 trustee trainings. Sometimes they're in person and sometimes they're online like this one. Usually we offer 3, but we did one of our colleagues jumped ship and is now the director of the Great Bend Public Library. So we're just doing 2 this year. One of the things that I always try to do is to make sure that there's a little bit of trustee training going on at every monthly meeting. That can be verbally through the director's report. And that can also be an agenda item. And it can just be a little bit of just something brief. There are all kinds of videos on the CKLS trustee training LibGuide or a resource guide. Some of them are just 5 minutes and they are really great. A well-trained librarian makes an exciting library, but well-trained board members really, they make such a difference to the library. They're excited and they want to move things forward. One of the other important parts of a board member's professional development is to know and understand the Kansas Open Meetings Act and the Kansas Open Records Act. If you didn't get a copy of COMA and CORA, as they're called, from your library director as part of your orientation, have them contact CKLS and we'll send a print copy out to you. Now, as individual board members, we've been talking before, let me step back just a minute. We've been talking about the board as a whole, and now we're going to talk about individual board members or individual trustees. These are the questions that you'll be asking yourself. Do I have a good record of attendance and participation? Do I make it a priority to come to meetings? We all know that things happen. People have health crises and they're not able to attend. Did I let them know that I'm not going to be able to be here for several months? The reason that I talk about good record of attendance and participation is twofold. It's important to know that Kansas statutes say that nobody can kick somebody off the library board. If you have an individual who was on the library board and for whatever reason they go to prison, you still can't kick them off of the library board. You can ask them to resign. CKLS has letters already composed for this, and they're very empathetic, and they talk about how difficult it is to do business or to make a quorum, but you can't kick them off, and that's Kansas statute. The reason for that is because just because someone has a difference in opinion with you does not mean they're right or wrong, and just because maybe you get council members or a mayor who doesn't agree with someone who was previously appointed, they can't remove them from office, and that office is the board. So there's the reason for that. And the other reason is because a board has to have a quorum to do business. And for most of you, that's going to be 5 members need to be there. That's why it's important that your mayor needs to know that they are a board member with full board member privileges, and that if board members can't attend, they can certainly call into the meeting and participate that way, and that way you can reach a quorum. Some boards choose not to meet in the summer, some don't meet in December because they can't get people there. I think that when people understand what really needs to happen at board member meetings, they'll understand the importance of having a meeting monthly. Do you as a board member understand the library's mission? Your library might not have a mission statement, but what role does your library fill in your community? That's a great question to put on an agenda and have a very brief discussion, because to me, that would be a continuing education or a professional development, because different people are going to have different ideas about what the library does in the community. And you're going to get some great ideas out of there. Some people might think, okay, well, a new parent might say they have great programming for kids. And a senior might say, it's a great place for me to meet and socialize with my friends. And some people might say, it's where I do my homework every day. But it's important to gather all of those ideas. Board members don't just need to know the statistics of the library, they need to know the stories of the library. Why do people use the library in your community? Who uses the library? And why? As a board member, you do need to use the library. I would say visit the library here as well. I always say you don't need to be a reader to be a good librarian. You just know how to find information and turn people in the right direction to help them discover it. You don't need to be a reader to be a board member. You should have a library card because you should know everything that a library card gives to you. And that way then, if you're waiting in the line at the grocery store and somebody's talking about, oh my gosh, it's so expensive to purchase ebooks all the time, you can then do a quick commercial or an infomercial for the library and let them know you don't need to spend your money on that. Your tax dollars already buy those, and you can get those through the library at no additional cost. If you haven't, visit your library's website or your social media site, or better yet, have the library director at one of the meetings give you a little tour. And that way, then again, you can promote those to people in the community. There may be things about the library on the website that you never even knew. And if you use social media, be sure to like and follow the library. It'll let you know what's up to date and what's happening in the library. As a board member, do you come prepared to the meetings? Remember that I said that a board member doesn't just work at 1 hour a month. It's more like a 2 to 3 hour a month job. Do you read the packet? First off, do you get the packet a week in advance? And do you read the packet before the meeting? Do you take notes? Do you write down questions? Do you need to do a little research? Do you call the librarian and ask for some help on that? Some people on library boards have what I call the martyr syndrome. And that is that, and often it can be the board chair. And what will happen is something will need to be done. Some phone calls will need to be made, or something will need to happen. And the board member will throw that out there, wait just a very brief moment, and then say, okay, if nobody's going to do it, well, then I'll do it. And that's what I mean by the martyr syndrome. It's great that they're willing to help, but it's actually detrimental to the board. What happens then is that other board members don't have a chance, even if they're willing to serve on committees or to do extra work that might need to be done. Even worse is that they think, the other board members start to think that that's the president's responsibility. And I don't want to be president because I can't do all of that. We see this in boards, and it can be very difficult to correct. But what is most difficult is finding people to fill those officer positions in the future. I want to spend a moment on the next point because it's very important. As a board member, do I vote my conscience even when I disagree? As a board member, you were not appointed to the board to be a yes man or a yes woman. You were appointed to represent a segment of your community. That's why a great board has a diverse mix of board members. You need to vote your conscience. That means that it's okay to say, I'm not ready to make a decision on this. Can we wait until next month? Can we add this to next month's agenda? I need to do some thinking, or I need to do some research. But it's very important. And I know it's difficult to go against the grain. But I think that when a board member is honest, and they're honest with themselves, they do a better job. Board members have what's called the public trust. The Pew Research Institute, and my goodness, it's been probably 8 years now. I need to get more up to date on my research, that's for sure. But the Pew Research Institute about 8 years ago did a survey across the United States from a broad, diverse segment of people. And the 3 most trusted entities or organizations in the United States were first, the military, second, first responders, and third were libraries. The public trusts libraries to be upheld, to be honest, to be open, and to be transparent. And that's one of the reasons that voting your conscience, even when you disagree with the rest, is so important. You've got to work to maintain that public trust. And one very important thing is to support board decisions outside of the meetings. Remember that corporate body that I talked about earlier. Okay, great. We're going to have plenty of time for questions. I've made a resource for you that has everything you need here. Let me stop sharing my screen and I will show it to you. Now I need to show you one other thing. Do I have to do that? It's here. Nope, I need to escape. There we go. Okay, let me share my screen and I'm going to show you my desktop. That's what I want. Sorry, I don't know a soul in the world who doesn't talk this through. If you go to ckls.org, that's our website. It is not ckls.com. That is about colon cleansing. We are ckls.org. And you scroll down. Here you see Welcome to LibGuides. This is where all of our resources live. And if you click here on Trustee Training Resources, it's going to take you away to this page here where there are Trustee Training Resources, all kinds of things, library law, funding, budgets, charter ordinances, training videos. Remember I said some are even short, like 5 minutes, and library board evaluations. Before I go away from this page, if for whatever reason you watch an archived webinar, you're not here live, have your librarian go, or you can go and fill out the online CE form, and that way you get credit for that. We're going to click on Library Board Evaluation tab. I know this is kind of small. Here you go. There are all kinds of things. We're going to put the recording of the video up here as soon as we've got that ready. But some great documents. These are outside documents, but here is a board self-evaluation questionnaire that tells you how to do it and all kinds of things. This is just a generic board evaluation, not just for libraries. Roles and responsibilities of trustees. This is a document that CKLS made that talks about who does what when and how we help one another. And here's a trustee self-assessment. This is a library trustee self-assessment, and you would do this for your own information. You can see here by number 3, you would want to substitute Kansas for Kentucky, but this is something that you could spend about 15 minutes on at a board meeting. And then you would know how you're doing as an individual. So lots of good things here. Let me see. When it's time to perform your board assessment, just lots of good stuff there. I am open for your questions. Boy, the chat's been busy.
As you've gone along this evening, Gail, I have
been
throwing those direct links to the pages you've asked for.
Excellent.
So we've kept them up. So you might want to save the chat, but again, the chat will be part of the recording and the archive, because we've tried to stay one step ahead of Gail this evening, but I don't always do a good job of that. We had a couple of questions, one that came in to me privately, which was a really interesting question. It's going back to discussion of executive session.
Yes.
So you were speaking to the fact that it's appropriate for a library board member to attend by telephone.
Yes.
The question that was asked was, can they attend the executive session by telephone?
Yes.
And what if they're in a public location, perhaps like, I don't know, their office?
Okay. That's actually got an easy answer to it. One of the things that happens about this time of year, because you have new board members, is certain documents need to be filled out. Board members need to fill out a conflict of interest statement. You should fill out a loyalty oath. You should fill out a material interest statement. And you need to be trained on ethics. Our library profession has a very strong set of ethics. Those actually might be a wee bit different, or even quite a bit different than your personal ethics, but you do need to support the ethics of the profession. Your library director can help you with that. One of the things that we're in the process of preparing is a template for an ethics policy. Remember, I talked a little bit about public trust. If your board member is in a public place, they need to move to a private place. A library board can move into executive session for just a few reasons, and this is part of the Kansas Open Meetings Act. Most often, the board will move into executive session to talk about non-elected personnel, and that usually happens annually when the board is reviewing or evaluating the director. When you talk about personnel, you do so in executive session. because those individuals, even if they're being remediated, still have rights. So yes, you can on the phone, but they need to move to a more private space, or they need to excuse themselves from the executive session. When a board goes into executive session, one of the things that they need to do, if they're doing it correctly, and guess what? We have a template for that, so you don't have to guess, is they name who's going into executive session and how long that session will last. If you say 5 minutes and you find you need 20 minutes, the template tells you that you need to come out, resume the meeting, go back in, spend longer, however it is, what you'll follow the steps in the procedure. You name who is going to go in with you. And so the board member then would say, I'm in a public space. I need to recuse myself from attending this executive session. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you buzzed by a word, but you
Uh-oh.
didn't go into detail. You buzzed by the word. Library trustees need to be advocates or practice advocacy for their libraries.
Yes. And I don't want you to be scared of this word. Advocacy is kind of scary. If you look it up on Google, don't do it. It's like looking up medical things on Google. Just don't do it. When I talk about advocacy, I talk about building relationships. When I first came to Kansas, one of the things that hadn't been done at CKLS was advocacy with our legislators. And I got thrown into the mix in Topeka. I went up there like a barefoot pilgrim all by myself. Of course, it snowed, the whole 9 yards. It was January, beginning of session. And after my second year, I really realized, because I was having great success with this and I couldn't really figure out why, I was able to get in and meet with the legislators frequently when other people never got an appointment. And what I realized is that advocacy is about talking about something that you believe in, and it's about building relationships. And that is something that library people are very good at. If you're on the board, it's because you believe in the library, or somebody talked you into it and you've come to love the library. Or more importantly, you like what the library does for your community and how it enhances the quality of life in your community. I can't sell anything except Girl Scout cookies, and that's because I believe in them. I believed in what they did for me, and I love them, of course. Thin Mints, gotta love them. I love them frozen. I mean, I just love them. I can talk about them for days. That's the only thing I could sell. You may find yourself in a similar position that it's uncomfortable to talk about things to strangers, but talk about something you know about. Talk about the story time that made such a difference in your child's life. Talk about the summer library program where your 8-year-old became a really fluent reader. And it's not because reading was an important part of the summer library program. It's just because they were hanging around the library and they saw something that sparked their interest and they took off like a lightning bolt, and they've just been a reader ever since. Talk about the things that are important to you and the things that are meaningful to you in connection with the library. And that's what advocacy is. And the relationship part of advocacy is just like any other relationship. I'm sure you've heard 100 times, if you want a good marriage, you have to work on it. If you want a good relationship with your kids, you have to work at it. If you want a good relationship for the library with your council members and your stakeholders in the community, you're going to have to work on it a little bit. I just recently worked with a library that was having some struggles with their community, and we crafted a really quick advocacy tool. They took a piece of paper and they drew a few lines, and they had 12 squares. And in each square, they wrote one of the months of the year. And right then and there, in like 5 minutes, we brainstormed a different idea for every month. And what they decided then is board members, they passed that paper around and they wrote their name on it. And that was the month they were going to contact one of the council members. Or that was the month that they were going to post something on Facebook about their library. Patty, give me some of the ideas that were on there. I know it was, I love my library, and American Library Week is in April, and there was a great idea for go ahead.
There were things like Children's Book Week and Kansas Reads to Preschoolers, but it was also things like celebrating an event, but tying it to the library. So like National Cookbook Month, because there's a way to sell to a specific audience, perhaps, but you may make things broader. There's a ton of wonderful calendars that I can point you to if you're looking for something either A, to celebrate, or B, to connect your library to the community as a whole. And that's what you're doing.
Mhm.
I want to take a second to tell an example of a story. Gail talked about there's two parts of what the library staff does to let the library trustees know what's happening in their building. I came from my most recent library job, and come Monday morning, my boss would look at me and say, how many people came to the program on Saturday? And I was like, okay, 15 or 4 or whatever, because sometimes that number was 82 and sometimes it was 4. But I got tired of that Monday morning question. And I was like, but you didn't ask what really happened in the day. So as we've trained this to the libraries that we serve, we talk that the stats are important, but so is the story. I have a great story from one of our member libraries. One summer library day, it was hotter than Hades out, and the library building at that time was very small. And so she had staff or volunteers, excuse me, because she didn't have staff. She had volunteers run in, jump rope in one part, and they were drawn on the sidewalk in another part, and kids were making tin can romper stompers. And so a gentleman drove by and saw all the excitement in this very small town, town of 250, 280 perhaps.
Oh, that's a big
drove
town
by-
in central Kansas, Patty.
Oh, sorry, drove by in his work vehicle, and he got to the end of the block and he turned around and he pulled up and he said to what looked like the person in charge, was a volunteer, and says, what is this? And she said, well, it's the summer library program. Well, what's going on? He asked. And so she told him about the activities, and he says, okay. And he drove away. And then he got down the other end of the block and turned around and came back, and he said, okay, who's in charge? And pointed out the library director, and she came over and was speaking to him. And he said, I want to be a part of this. And she says, do you have kids that want to do this? She wasn't sure what he wanted. He said, no. And he handed her a check for $100. And she said, I don't understand. And he said, I want my name, my company's name, to be associated with this. He didn't live in the community. He was passing through, but he saw the magic of what was happening for children in this town. Now, I'm sorry if that story doesn't give you a little bit of chill. You need to take a look at your responsibilities as a library trustee, because I've told this story a dozen times, and every time I think of how lucky that community was. And it's resulted in $100 check for, what is this, Gail, 7-8 years now? And it's not the $100 check, although it's a nice gift because she can put it towards programming. But what it is it showed how important a library community was to the community itself. And so
I would recommend that you ask your librarian what their $100 story is, because every librarian has one. And you may have $100 story of your own. And that's another great idea for a professional development idea, is to share those.
And
have you got any more questions for me tonight?
Okay, well, I have to ask the one we got last night, because we have a different audience tonight. We had one question that was submitted anonymously for last night's presentation, but it was kind of a preview to tonight. You had mentioned that library board members in Kansas cannot be removed. And so the question was, why do you bother to do a board evaluation when you can't fire or ask a board member to leave?
And boy, it seems to me that there's no better time to do an evaluation if you've got a problem that you're dealing with. Because what you'll do then is you will strategize ways that cause this problem to happen, ways to fix it, and ways to make sure it didn't happen again. Often, someone who did not receive all the information about being a library board member before they ever were appointed have a very different idea about what it means to be a board member. They are going to be in charge. The treasurer often thinks, oh, I'm going to sign the checks. And when they find out they don't get to, they're grumpy. They're downright grumpy. This is who they are. I sign checks. No, you don't do that as a library treasurer. So board members have to know what they're getting themselves in for, what their time commitment is. And I've talked about that several times, and they need a really good orientation. Frequently, those are the things that let a board member know, yes, what I'm doing is very important and it's making a big difference in my community. Oftentimes, a board member did not get those things and they don't understand the importance of attending meetings. Sometimes you will get a contrarian appointed to the board. That's not a bad thing. That's an opportunity to change their mind. It may take time and it may take a lot of finesse, which is exhausting, but how worth it to have another library supporter. And eventually, sometimes you may need to call CKLS and say, we've just got a problem we need help with. We really do. We need some help.
And as so often, Gail and I are on the same wavelength. The last comment I was going to make is your call is to CKLS. Your 800 number, that's why it's there. But I have watched Gail work through difficult board relations. I've watched her work through situations where perhaps a library director has perhaps stayed a little bit too long at a job, and handled those situations with such finesse and with such kindness that everybody realizes that's the best decision. So please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. There's that truly there is no dumb question thing. That truly is the right answer. We here at CKLS are here to help you. This is what we exist for. And
we're paid for.
We love the work that we do. We're passionate about librarianship. We're passionate about libraries. And yeah, we love books too.
And we're dorky, but that's okay. Right. Patty's right. Your first call should be to us, and don't wait until it's a huge problem. Patty has an example as a children's librarian about, storybooks are not big and fat. Call us when your problem is just 2 storybooks high, not this high. It takes a lot longer to work on that. And it's so much easier to nip a situation in the bud. If you need more help, probably figuring out how to talk the rest of your board or your whole board, if you're a librarian here tonight, into doing a library evaluation, give me a call. My schedule is pretty clear for the fall, which is exciting. I'd be glad to come to a library board meeting and do a one-on-one or a face-to-face with all of you and help you with this. We're over time now, as always, but we thank you for being with us. And if you have any questions, you have our contact information. And remember, ckls.org, scroll down and click on the Trustee Training Resources, and you click on the Library Evaluations tab. We'll be adding more information to that as we go along. And we look forward to hearing from you. And thank you for being with us tonight. And Liz, you can stop the recording. You're welcome, Lavita.